Hey guys, it's Aiden. In this video, I'll be going over some ACT English questions and going over the most common grammar rules and the most repetitive questions, as well as a few tricks that the ACT likes to put on their tests. If you guys haven't already, I highly recommend you watch my full ACT guide where I provide countless free resources, including practice tests and real tests, as well as sites that help me during my preparation, and I'll link it somewhere up here. Alright. There are two main types of questions on the ACT English section: usage questions and rhetoric questions. Usage questions include correcting punctuation, using pronoun agreement, or fixing comma places, while rhetoric questions include asking if this sentence should be added or removed from the paragraph, revising opening or closing sentences, and picking correct word choices. And I'll tell you this right now, English is the easiest section to improve your score on. And I'll be going over some of the most common questions and tricks that I've encountered and how you can avoid falling for these traps. So I recommend pausing the video and trying to do the question first before watching my explanation so you can learn from your mistakes. Let's take a look at this first question. After 4 years in the NBA, she noticed that people no longer talked about her gender. She was simply a referee. We know that both of these sentences are independent clauses. We know this because both sentences can make sense on their own, right? So if we have two independent clauses, we can't combine them with a comma. Otherwise, it would be a comma splice. So we immediately know F is wrong. We can also rule out J because that one doesn't make any sense if you read it out loud. So now we're left with G and H. A huge tip on the ACT English is that you can treat semicolons like periods. They're essentially the same thing on the ACT. So if we substitute the semicolon with a period, we can easily see the incorrect option choice would be G, because then the second sentence would not be independent. So we are left with only one logical answer, and that's H. It's super important to get familiar with all the punctuation types, so things like periods, commas, apostrophes, colons, semicolons, dashes, etc. Alright, moving on to the next question. The installed design, called Buitenschot Land Park and finished in 2013, consisted of 150 earthen ridges. Obviously, you should be able to tell that it sounds wrong just by reading it out loud. We can immediately cross off no change as an option choice. The first thing I want you to do is notice the highlighted part in the question. Notice how it's embedded between two commas, and that essentially makes it a non-essential clause, meaning that it's not necessary in the sentence. So what I would do is just ignore the non-essential part of the sentence and just read it as the installed design are consisted of. But obviously that's still wrong, right? So let's move on to option B. Option B is also incorrect because since the subject of the sentence is the installed design, it should be has consisted instead of have consisted. It also sounds wrong if you say it out loud, right? 90% of options in the English exam can be obviously eliminated by just saying it out loud. You don't have to be skeptical of every single option choice, right? You don't have the time to be worrying about that. If it obviously sounds wrong, then eliminate the option choice. Now we're just left with C and D. Since the sentence is talking about the installed design, which is singular, we would have to use consists instead of consist, or that would just be option C. A really helpful way to distinguish which one to use is by replacing the singular subject with it or the plural subject with they. So it would be it consists or they consist. This one is one of the trickier problems that you might see. What do you think the subject of this sentence is? If you said the Navajo language, you'd be wrong. The subject in this sentence is what's doing the making, right? So what is actually making the Navajo language complex? And that would be the structure and sounds. The structure and sounds is plural, right? So we know that it has to be make instead of makes, which eliminates option A and B. The second word is referring back to the Navajo language, which is singular, meaning that it should be referred to as it. So the final answer would be make it. Alright, now let's take a look at these two problems. Let's take a look at question 58. Which choice most precisely indicates, right? Keyword most precisely indicates what the singing, ringing tree creates every day. Just by reading the answer choices, it seems like most of these would be a valid answer except for maybe J, right? But this question asks for the most precise, right? So what most precisely talks about what the singing ringing tree creates every day? One option choice stands out from the rest, and that would be option choice H, because it mentions a song, right? No other option choice specifies precisely what the tree creates, only referencing it as something, right? Instead of the specific song. So the answer would be option H. All right, moving on to question 59. Consistent with the architect's vision, the sculpture's eerie, melancholy notes resonate with tourists and citizens alike. The sentence obviously needs a comma after vision because it introduced the rest of the sentence, so that only leaves options B and C. Now we need to decide whether a comma belongs after eerie, and this is where a grammar rule comes into play. You should put a comma between two adjectives if they are coordinate adjectives. A good trick to recognizing coordinate adjectives is by switching the places of the adjectives around and seeing if they make sense. Eerie, melancholy notes make sense, and melancholy, eerie notes also make sense. So they're coordinate adjectives and they have to have a comma, making the answer B. But on the other hand, say if I had something like the bright yellow jacket. If we switch it around, it would be yellow bright jacket, and that wouldn't really work. So in that case, you wouldn't use a comma. Let's take a look at these two problems now. The most important part of question 46 is what the question is asking. The question asks for the most specific description of the appearance, similarly to the singing ringing tree question we just did a couple minutes ago. In this case, the answer choice with the most descriptions of its physical appearance would be G, right? Because it's comparing the size and shape to an almond. Now, question 47 utilizes something called non-essential phrases. And we talked about this earlier with a phrase between two commas, right? You can see that the phrase called miracle fruit is surrounded by two commas, and this makes it non-essential, meaning that it's not necessary for the sentence to be complete. And like we did before, a good way to correctly identify these is by just removing the phrase from the sentence and reading it to see if it makes sense, right? So dark red and containing one seed. The berry of whatever that is may not seem particularly impressive at first. And that makes sense, right? So it is a non-essential phrase. So A would be the correct answer. All right, now let's take a look at question 19. For most of these types of questions, I would say the shorter the better. Most time, ACT likes to make redundant or grammatically incorrect additions to try and trick you, right? So obviously it's not A, right? You can't just add furthermore to that sentence. So that's obviously wrong. And B and C are both redundant, right? The previous text already specifies that the breeding ground and migration paths are intersected. And it also specifies that there are many animals. So there isn't any reason to add quite a few of them at the end, right? So the answer is D. For these types of questions, you just have to choose the most straightforward answer. Overall, I'd say that around 60 to 70% of the test is just knowing grammar rules and punctuation, and the rest is just using common sense and actually reading the text. I've linked a really nice article by Prep Scholar that I used to learn all the punctuation rules, and I've also linked another article also by Prep Scholar for a brief overview of the most important grammar rules, and another PDF with much more of them and a lot of examples as well. If this video helped you and you learned something new, I would appreciate if you guys subscribed. I'll be making similar videos for the other 3 ACT subjects as well, so you don't want to miss that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to hit me up on IG or leave them in the comments. Peace.